myself and the panel and the session today. Just to talk about logistics, what we'll do is about 10 to 15 minute, we'll do introductions, talk about the session, 10 to 15 minute presentations from each of us, just to sort of set the stage on our background, who we are, what company we're with, and what feedback we have, just to anticipate the Q&A on project approaches. That can sort of feed the questions. We definitely encourage questions. I have some written here. If we need to stoke the fire a little bit. There's a microphone in the third row on the right side of the room. Welcome you to pass the microphone around or step up to it if you'd like to speak. I may also want to hear and rephrase what you're saying if you don't end up using the microphone, just to make sure we captured everything. So does that sound good for logistics? Does that sound fun, engaging, all the good stuff? Okay, wonderful. So just to introduce myself, I'm Mark Oden. I'm the CEO of BIM Designs. I'll get into what BIM Designs is during the presentation, 3D modeling as a service and laser scanning, all that fun stuff. We also have Dustin Williams here closest to me. He's the CEO and founder of Flywheel AEC, a civil BIM services company. Then we have Tim Riefenberg, BIM manager at Balfour Beatty. And we have Kurt Johnston, civil design lead and BIM manager at Kiewit. And then in this session, we're going to be using BIM for a construction project. Has many benefits, but how best can you apply BIM to a project without adding more time or complexity to a project? We'll hear from leaders in the construction and architects space as they describe their approaches to BIM and how it has transformed their AEC workflows. As I mentioned before, the session format includes brief presentations followed by a moderated panel discussion and audience Q&A. So we'll start with my presentation, and then we'll move on to Dustin, and then Tim, and then Kurt. So just a little bit about BIM Designs Incorporated and myself. I spent 10 years in Silicon Valley. I was a master's in electrical engineering, and then I moved into the tech space. So I actually went to University of Florida, which is represented here on the expo floor, which is really fun. Yeah, go Gators. I was very excited to see them. And worked for Cisco Systems and startups and network management, product management, strategy and planning, mergers and acquisitions, and then CXO roles for different startups. I ended up acquiring this company when it was just 3 people, and in the past 4 years we've grown into a nationwide company of 54 employees working remotely, and we only plan on growing and expanding from there. So that all happened between 2018 and today. So as I mentioned before, we are a domestic leader dedicated to a diverse and inclusive workplace and culture. It's one of our core values. We are the only certified, federally recognized minority-owned business that's signatory with 26 unions in North America. We believe in working with union trade journeymen to do the LOD 400 modeling, for those that understand that LOD phrase. And we provide turnkey MEPF design and detailing solutions to contractors that cost-effectively expand their virtual design and construction capabilities. So we provide staff augmentation and lump sum services to contractors of all shapes and sizes. Some notable projects is we've worked out in the semiconductor industry, most recently in Phoenix, but other areas of the country as well. We've worked commercial with Google Moffett Place and many other commercial projects. These are just some notable ones. Residential, 9th and Lenora Tower in Seattle. We worked at a sports center in Arlington, Texas. The largest student housing at the time campus, UC Davis West Village for education, casinos like Casino Morongo, hospitality and healthcare, many hospitals. So we have a very diverse team that can do LOD 400 design for all types of industries. So our core services would be engineering, design, build, MEPF, BIM, and virtual design. We can do pre-construction consulting, owner's management, things like this. Coordination, we can do coordination, database management, and 3D reality capture laser scanning, which is using many of the products that we see at the conference here today. So that's a little bit about BIM Designs. To transition to the core topic of leading ways to lead a project or a successful project. Just have some bullet points and then some notes that I want to share. So one is our observations, just to talk about observations over the last 3 or 4 years of working in this space. There are pain points of the contract and negotiation management. So what can we all do to simplify that process together? My analogy that I like to use is we're all The way it's currently structured, the contract structure is currently there, is that we are all on our own rowboats or our own canoes going down the same river, down the same stream, but we have different coxswains, we have different people yelling the directions at us, and so we're kind of going like this all throughout the river. So what can we do holistically, and how can we all organize together to have a common contract, a common legal structure that we work under the general contractor, so that we just have one coxswain speaking to us. There's also a knowledge gap in the industry, right? There's folks that have worked out in the field and that are trained on how to do that. There's folks that know AutoCAD, and then there's the gap in between. And then there's the whole rest of the world and the need, which is combining those needs, and the folks that aren't, that don't have the field experience or the CAD experience. There could be mixed reality integrated into QC processes. We've heard a lot about mixed reality, AR, VR, and the mixed version of that at this conference. And there could be managed efficiencies that bring savings for owners and GC's investments into BIM, and that's not the guaranteed savings that you would get for utilizing BIM, as we all know, and we've all been educated on, but you can also bring more efficiency into that process. How do you better manage that entire process to bring further savings? Because if there's delays on the BIM side, there's delays on the construction side. And then there could be reduced litigation by using BIM and keeping very careful documentation, keeping versions of the BIM model, scanning the job site as it's being built. All of this documentation that you're using to build the actual building can be stored and saved later, not only for asset management and facilities management, as has been discussed at the conference, but also litigation management as well. So the role that's played by owners and GCs, how can owners and GCs help? I know that's not the audience that we have today, but they can help, and we can encourage them to help us support and empower the BIM process from day one. So the better and the more we educate the general contractor and the owner about how important the BIM process is and how much they should embed that into the project and program plan as gatekeepers and blockers is very critical. We should all utilize the BIM model early and often to convey feedback. So let's get in front of the owner, let's get in front of the GC and show them what's happening on a very active and consistent basis, so that they can share their feedback rather than get to the end of the IFF stage or the sign-off stage and then there's feedback and changes, or worse, get to construction and there's changes in feedback because the owner didn't see the fly through the model. It's very important for all stages, the architect, the engineer, the designers like us, to collaborate with the LOD 400 model in mind. The LOD 400 model, for those who might not be familiar, is effectively the constructible model. What would be most realistic to construct this in real space? And then enforce a well-specified BIM execution plan with both the technical and business program management. So it's not just the BIM execution plan and signing that document, which is typically 60 pages that nobody reads. It's how you manage and enforce the BIM execution plan throughout the entire life cycle of that project. What can we all do to help make sure that projects are more efficient? We can make sure that we ensure clarity of expectations at the project start. That's critical. So to understand what your needs are and have those needs met before the project start. We all are faced with the concrete pour date, right? I think we can all relate to we have to hit that date no matter what. But if our needs aren't met, that we're at the 6 months prior to concrete start, then we're starting behind the curve, and eventually that concrete pour date will get affected because we don't have our needs met on day one and we're running behind the 8 ball. We want to negotiate and execute contract and payment terms before BIM kickoff. Same reason, your payments could be delayed. Your terms aren't clearly understood. Who's liable, who's responsible? You have to do the project and you don't understand these things, and you're putting more and more risk onto your individual business for that. We want to make sure that all project materials, submittals, material matrix, BIM execution plan, standards are all set prior to kickoff. In fact, the owner, we would hope, I would hope that the owner would enforce that all of these things are understood. Someday we can get them to that point where, hey, this job does not start, this BIM kickoff does not start until we actually understand everything we need to start that job. We want to bring meeting excellence to coordination meetings. I'm sure we've all been a part of meetings where there's 20 people in that meeting, it's run for 4 hours, and maybe there's about 30 minutes of productivity in that meeting. That's 20 people times 4 hours, that's 80 hours that was just billed to the owner that was highly inefficient, minus the half hour times 20. So we want to be able to bring very strong meeting excellence to coordination meetings. I am running out of time, but I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards about how we can run excellent meetings. We've done a lot of internal work within our company to make sure we run as efficient as possible meetings, setting agendas, having a timekeeper, having a note taker, making sure there's actions after, for example. And then again, working very closely with the owner to seek that feedback and utilize the the technology that we all know so well, like now this works AR, VR. Let's not just use that in our silos, break out of our silos and bring that up to the owner. So thank you so much for allowing me to give that overview of BIM Designs. Dustin, if you will. Thank you, sir.
Can everybody hear me all right? All right, so I'm Dustin Williams. I'm the CEO at Flywheel AEC. I've been in the AEC space for 16 years now. My first 10 years was doing civil engineering and land surveying. Towards the end of that, laser scanners and drones became more prevalent. Started doing R&D with that type of work, and then I took that and brought it to Flywheel. We operate out of the greater Denver area and the San Francisco area, but most of our work is all virtual coordination meetings and things like that. So we really, within pretty much the United States, we can service those projects. A couple of the projects in the past, so in 2016, Flywheel was formed, and since then we've been lucky enough to work on some of these mega projects, a lot of smaller projects as well, which we really enjoy, but just as far as notable projects, we're currently working on the MLS Stadium in St. Louis. Previously on a big tech campus in Cupertino. The UC Merced project is not super well known, but it was a very large project. And campus type project with lots of underground utilities, and lots of earthwork and structural concrete. We did design assist and construction coordination. Microsoft Silicon Valley campus was a big one for me. I really enjoyed working on that one. I actually got to do the conceptual design on it when I was doing civil engineering, and then once the project kicked off, the timing just worked out that we ended up being able to see it through for the to the end of the actual construction process. So that was really neat. You don't often get to see that unless you're in a design build kind of situation. The Allegiant Stadium, which was quite a massive project with a really tight timeline. We utilized all the possible tools we could to hit that schedule. In conjunction, obviously, we worked closely with Mortensen on that project. And Google's doing a bunch of work in Mountain View, California, and one of those projects is the Charleston East project. Something really neat about that Charleston East project is they're putting in these solar panels, little tiny solar panels that are draped across that roof. You can kind of see the configuration of that roof. It's super unique, and they developed that technology. I got to see that get developed. It was really neat. So, as I kind of alluded to, we specialize in civil BIM and reality capture, and we are also surveyors in the state of California, so we really want to bridge the gap between design and construction, and then those scopes of work. That's really where we focus. We try not to stray too far into the building. There's plenty of people like BIM Designs that are excellent at that. So who we work with, we really have a project-first approach. So we really, we will work with anybody on any stakeholder really, the owners directly sometimes. Usually that's for our reality capture type work. And then we will supplement surveyor work where at the very beginning of the project, we'll do reality capture in addition to out in the field, ground and pound kind of field GPS and total station work. Whether that's, we've been doing a lot of UAV LiDAR and just drone photogrammetry as well as long-range laser scanners. And this again is all outside the building footprint. General contractors, we work with a few on all their projects, on projects that are like a data center or a campus or a stadium that have a lot of outside the building coordination to do, whether that's earthwork or underground utilities is the biggest one. And then we have a few trade contractors that we're partners with. So they have maybe like a BIM manager, and then we extend their BIM team, and we do the modeling. We co-attend meetings and do the constructability review. We have a lot of civil design experience, so we can see a project from the designer standpoint and then also from construction standpoint. And so we try to submit really helpful RFIs and things like that so that we can expedite the process. So our bid process is really, I think, what Mark is saying about really having an excellent plan is really all this is trying to say. We have a couple of step process. If it's a large BIM coordination type project, we're identifying any potential, it's a very tight schedule, or is it a large footprint where we want to monitor the progress over time. Does the civil work need to get done before, or between demolition and before the building starts going up? Is there not very much room for logistics within the outside the building footprint in the property line? Those are all things that contribute to more difficult civil type work. And then we typically will support the project. Like, we're not just developing a BIM implementation plan. We will help give feedback. Oftentimes, the BIM implementation plan that's given to us doesn't really address civil very well. It is really just a copy and paste of architectural, usually. So we get feedback on that. Things that make actual, sense as far as level of development and accuracy for the civil scopes of work. And then we work with the client, try to over-communicate as much as possible because we are usually the ones attending those coordination meetings, and just keeping them in the loop because they're, as soon as we're done, especially in large projects, we're finishing coordination and they're going out and building it very, very shortly after. They're usually first in the ground. So just real quick, I think during our panel discussion, we'll dive into this stuff much more quickly, or much more in depth, but the typical process for the actual application would be creating a coordination model from the design documentation, then reviewing that model for constructability, which we do on our end, and then also our trade contractor will do, and then we'll bring our minds together on that. And then we'll attend those meetings either by ourselves or with the superintendent or some decision maker. That's usually the best approach. When they understand BIM, they know how they're going to build the project. They're the ones that really need to attend those meetings with us. We just facilitate. And then we update the coordination model with constructability type of feedback. Once everything at the coordination is done, we are exporting the geometry for the survey layout team. And then we'll round trip, they'll get their as-built documentation, give it to us, and then we'll create typically an as-built model of what was constructed. Primarily, we're doing civil BIM work, but we also do a lot of reality capture. And we can go into this more, but I'm seeing a lot more projects, especially the larger and more coordination-focused projects, utilizing reality capture in a bunch of different ways. A little less laser scanning than it used to be, I think, because the advancements in like the drone technology. The resolution has gotten a lot higher. We're now using LiDAR, so there's a lot more opportunities for drones to take over some of the scope of work instead of a little bit, what can be a slower process, but it definitely has its place with the laser scanners. So then typical deliverables are usually ortho mosaics, point clouds, meshes, video, 360 photos are very commonly used now, and just still photos, but every one of those has a place in project stakeholders will rely on a different each one of those. I think we talked before about a few commonly used collaboration tools that people are using now. I'll just touch on them and we can go into more detail later. The blue icons, Plannerly, that is really helping your BIM execution plan stay current, and then you can also round trip. You can add your schedule to it and keep people on schedule, keeping them accountable at the coordination phase. Everyone pretty much familiar with Procore and Autodesk as far as like a common data environment. I'm seeing, at least on the big projects, that Autodesk and Procore are being used on the same project for different uses. Revisto is a personal favorite. It can be a common data environment, but it's really just getting everybody on the same page and doing a lot of clash detection, and then issue tracking or clash tracking. And Join is similar, I would say, to Plannerly. Join is pre-construction software. They start all the way at the estimation phase. And then Remote Optics is another company that I'm involved with, and that's collaboration software for reality capture. As I touched on, I just want to give a quick shout out. I'm also going to be giving a US IBD presentation tomorrow at the same time. And we're going to be talking about and hopefully getting lots of feedback from owners and contractors and everyone involved with basically just a simple decision-making guide, not a guide that tells you what to use, but how to think about what tools you want to use for reality capture. There's a lot more options than there used to be, and just thinking through it very quickly, it should be a really good resource for everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dustin. Awesome. Tim, come on up. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'm clicking the button.
He's queuing up the presentation, but are we all jotting down notes on the Q&A? Questions coming up? Yeah? I just, while we're in transition, we usually start our meetings with acknowledgements. I want to thank Jason and Gerald for their AV skills in the back. So thank you, gentlemen. All right, Tim, take us away.
Thanks. I work for Balfour Beatty. I'm like their senior process manager. I've been on the BIM side for about 15, 17 years. I was on the design side. I transitioned to GC role. I've been out in the field. And then I've been uniquely on a 3-year, 4-year integration side where it was design build and really field support. So I definitely do leverage more of process, but also doing the actual work. And like I said, I've been at Balfour Beatty for 3 months, and why this is a unique presentation is I'm sort of thrown into a situation where, great opportunity, big company, but there really wasn't any BIM standards. There was no really guidelines to do what I was supposed to do. So I'm really going to talk about that process. And some of you might know Balfour Beatty, but real quick, it's over $1 billion in the Southeast, but globally we do about $27 billion. Big company, but believe it or not, there's not really a hierarchy of BIM. There's not one regional director out of London. There's nothing really locally. So that was really because of, Balfour Beatty in the Southeast is always a reactive process. No one really had the time to really sit down and figure out how do you implement BIM. That was really why I was brought into this. So right now I'm in Atlanta, but I manage a couple other offices. But I also have some legacy folks. These are other BIM people that have been there for years. And I was really brought on to how do we make this better and how do we grow as a leader. So like day one, I got thrown all these projects on my plate. Hey, I need to coordination this, got to scan this. I'm like, oh my God, just slow down. So I really took a hierarchy to the whole thing and said, BIM has always been this, like, do you guys do BIM? You do a checkbox. I really ask them, like, what's your BIM culture? What do your field guys think about BIM? What do your superintendents think about BIM? That's more important, because I want to know if we're going to go down this path, if we're not bought in from all those out in the field, as well as leadership, this is a waste of time. So really I took it to a 3-peg approach. So we have really 3 groups now. We have more with services. This will be like the BD stuff. This is going to be pursuit animations that Balfour used to do a lot of. And really, like, we also do modeling for subs. A good thing about Georgia specifically is we're the only state that does layout. We do have a group in Washington, D.C. that handles layout, but every region operates differently. They have different subs, different architects, different owners. So really, in Georgia, as long as I've been there, the caliber of our subs have always been lower. They just don't have the caliber that a lot of your groups do. And maybe it's because of schooling, or maybe it's just because the industry down there wasn't really a buildable area for the last 30 years. But we all know that everything's booming. So now we have a lot of influx of new projects. But moral of the stories is, I first asked, how do we support BIM? How do we pay for it, right? That's where it all starts. Because if we don't control the money, how do I get new equipment? How do I get new personnel? And they didn't really know. So, well, we just know it's an X percentage on a job. It's like, well, you know, we do $5 million jobs and we do $200 million jobs. Where does that money even go? So, moral of the story is we're really pushing field solutions because we were having a legacy group of our layout team. Great old school mentality, like a surveyor, real licensed surveyor. But he's using new technology. So he's actually doing twice the work than our coordinators were doing. If he's drawing edge slab and I'm drawing edge slab, why are we doing double the work? So we made the task of, we're going to own layout. It's only because of we are lacking personnel, the detailers in-house, to do such process. But I looked at the dollars and cents of what our field team provides, because we do a lot of self-perform layout for our concrete crews, but even our plumbers will do a lot of their layout too. But when we do laser scanning and our as-builds, for the owner side, there's a lot of revenue that's being generated. So that's why we're really promoting the Field Solutions Group. So yeah, this is really fun because I present this to our leadership because a lot of them didn't know what I did. They said, we love BIM. I really don't have a clue of what you do. So they always would say, like, BIM modeling. And I said, well, if you really want to take on this task of where we're going, let's have a conversation of where do you think we'll be 100 years from now? And they're like, oh, well, they're replaced by robots. Absolutely. But I'm like, okay, so we're all going to be replaced by robots. What are you doing now to offset that? And you have no clue. Like, we got to do projects now. We got to do this. We're just being reactive. We're never going to get ahead of the curve if we really start to think about what our business is going to look like in the next 100 years. And that's what I just showed this map of. In the beginning when BIM folks were out there, they were always just modeling. And really, FM started to evolve, and there's some other tools. And right around the 2008 to 2020, right now, laser scanners and obviously the drones have been a huge win. But now we do so much more than just modeling. But it's a big task because if you go to a company that doesn't understand all these other pieces, they're just so far behind, they might never catch up. So I like charts. If you look at, because I was in 2008, like everyone else, we all got let go on the design side. And if you look at the adoption rate of why BIM went through the roof, it really was a reaction to the economy. GCs, especially architects, they held on to their BIM folks because they knew that was the evolution where they needed to go. So at that time, a lot of the pursuit that we go after, a lot of those jobs were government jobs. And we were always using BIM as a leg up over our competition. Well, that's not really the case anymore. But now we have to do, what are we doing different? It's more about our BIM culture. What tools are in our arsenal that we're going to use? So if you really look at, the owners have sort of been, lagging behind a little bit. What's interesting in the land market I'm from Chicago originally. There's a lot of owners from Chicago who are actually moving to the southeast because everyone's just building down there. But they're actually upping the game of our owners, our understanding that there's this new BIM culture they haven't seen before. So now we're actually getting some owners out there that are very educated on BIM that we never had before, and they're really making an impact in our market, which has been pretty good. Yes, this is the JD Knowledge. So if you just look at like Balfour Beatty, okay, so BIM, what do you do? So probably about 40 to 50% of it's coordination, 30 to 20% is going to be field layout, tech support, about 20 be pursuit and other tech stuff. But JD Knowledge did, there's a survey of all GCs really, and there's still a 68, 60%. Most GCs just focus on coordination as their main goal. Well, that's great, but reality is coordination should be a lot less. It should be like 20, maybe 30%. There should be other tools out there or processes they should be implementing as well. And that's to say, like, let me go to this. So where we're going, right? So I'm a really big precedent of we have to outsource a lot of our services because one is BIM's expensive. It's very hard to find someone who's really knowledgeable, that has a lot of experience, doesn't want to run the department. And so there's a lot of, these projects are very short. In Balfour, I'm always being reactive now. And I just don't have the time to pick the drawings and remodel. It's just too late. So we have to outsource a lot of our processes just because we don't have the labor market on the BIM side. It could take 2 to 3 years for us to find a really qualified BIM person to really implement into our company. But if you look at 2008 when the recession happened, housing prices went up, but also lumber, steel, and labor were tracking up as well. And if you look at the historical chart of today, obviously materials are through the roof, but it's very aligned with 2008. So if we were just, and I just tell folks that if construction is growing at 3.5% every year, I told my leadership group, 10 years from now, that's a 30% increase in projects that we're going to do no matter what. And we're still only 1 or 2 BIM folks. That's got to change. We have to have, by 10 years, almost double the size of our department just to stay up with that small 3%. But in Georgia, uniquely, our subs, they just don't have that caliber. So we are actually being consumed even more on our time. So we're probably talking about 20, 30 people in about the next 10 years, just keeping up the curve. Right now, we're about 5 people. Like I said, if you look at the difference too, 40% in the increased labor has changed. And that's just a general rule from there to now. So BIM's going to get more expensive, but the only way we're going to offset that cost is we need to create new tools, like new AI or be more efficient in our data management tools. More importantly, we have to really set our guidelines of what BIM folks do. That's really hard because we get thrown into situations that we really shouldn't be there. My time should be spent on figuring out how do we implement BIM early on. And that's something that they really have not grasped on. But I have a new job that I'm starting now that we're starting over. I'm actually working with pre-con. We're doing a scorecard for our layout teams. And actually we start putting some real BIM dollars in there really early on that they never ever did before. This is what I was just telling them that if you look at 2008 to 2025, our field solutions group, we have an outdated laser scanner, but we have a new robot. Dr. Carlson is our tool for civil. But reality is, if you look at the whole industry, we're almost 10 years behind. And the way we pick up next year, we're still going to be 10 years behind. And I always tell them that in 2025, we're going to still be 10 years behind, even if we change the curve now. So that's something that I've been really brought on to offset that curve.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, sir. Awesome. Let's have Kurt come on up. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's awake. My name is Kurt Johnston. I'm with Kiewit. We're a construction and engineering firm based out of Omaha, Nebraska. We do have offices and construction offices all around the country, basically Mexico and Canada now too. Kind of geared my presentation towards my experience at Kiewit. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about our company because I could take up my whole time with a lot up here. So, my background, I started a lot longer than I care to admit, but I started at Black Beach doing civil design and kind of pioneered a lot of the 3D work that we did there for highways, bridges, and things like that, doing a lot of animations. Kind of built that into a career doing a lot of 3D work and kind of morphed into BIM services before I came to Kiewit. So when I came on with Kiewit, we self-perform a lot of our construction. So a lot of our designs, where I'm based out of Kansas City, we're power plants, power generation, solar, things like that. Our office here in Denver is all based with infrastructure, so highways and bridges. A lot of the services that we do, I like to say that Kiewit already had the tools for BIM in place, but they didn't really call it BIM. And then here recently, they've had a lot of clients that part of that one line in the contract says we want a BIM model, and a lot of our guys are like, yeah, we'll do that at the end, and we have a handover. Didn't really put much thought into it. But when I started, I saw a lot of problems with that. Kind of like Tim mentioned, you're going to be a few years behind the 8 ball if you don't catch up now, get that stuff implemented, get it rolling before then. So a lot of my BIM experience was started before Kiewit. Since I've been here, we've tried to kind of grow that group and not really have separate people that are just BIM services, but we took people that are already doing that in other districts. Some of the leads, the BDC managers, things like that, kind of morphed them into a group that we're more or less a resource for BIM services. So when we have a contract that needs a BIM execution plan, they know they have one spot in Kiewit they can go to get that BIM execution plan, make sure it's tailored to the project, depending on what districts it's with, which disciplines are involved, things like that. Some of the questions that management would ask me as we're going through this whole process is kind of how I base my presentation on. I'm guessing a lot of, especially like with you guys, your experience, you're getting a lot of these questions too when you're starting up BIM services. A lot of it's based again on our client and contractual obligations. We have, if BIM's mentioned in a contract, it means nothing to a lot of our construction folks, but a lot of our engineers and stuff are like, okay, we need this, but what is it? So we tried to kind of expand on that. With all the different districts that Kiewit works, there's not a whole lot of overlap, but there are some, I want to say, backgrounds that each of the districts kind of mimics. And if you can imagine having 53 different districts doing 53 different things, that's a lot of variables that are in play. So what we try to do is just maybe try to get that a little more coordinated so that it looks like one company instead of 53 different companies doing the same project. Subject matter consolidation, that was one thing that we have models, we have tons of data in these models. Our construction guys were using just maybe a tenth of that data. Since I want to say probably the last 3 years, we've hired a lot of data analytics people that have gone through these models, gone through our processes, found improvements, found cost savings, you name it, they've done that. And that's all based on the data we already had. So that was one of the things that we really wanted to help promote, to make more money for the company, obviously, but for also just to help our whole coordination effort. Product consistency is a big one. If you look down different districts, some of our more heavily construction districts, their product consistency, they would have a model that was basically a building. It was like, here's the pad, and it's right there. Some of our other ones, like our power plants, they are down to a millimeter where that foundation needs to go, where all the stub-ups come up, things like that. So we really need to have high product consistency, a lot more data management, a lot of security involved in a lot of things that we do. Again, I kind of reiterated on who is our BIM services group. We don't have one BIM manager. We don't have one person that's really makes up this one group. We kind of like to incorporate input from a lot of our engineers, our estimators, all the way down to our clients. And what I mean by that is we'll have clients that ask for BIM, and a lot of them will ask that question, they have no idea what they're asking for. They're thinking it's a rep model or something like that. So we like to bring our clients in from day one, explain to them how we do our process, what tools we use to create those models, and basically give them a kind of a roadmap of the model they're going to get, the data they're going to have in their hands. There are so many clients that they'll walk out of our first coordination meeting with their eyes wide open, thinking, I had no idea that this facilities management model is going to have this much data in it, and they're actually like wringing their hands for construction to finish because they know they're going to have this model, they're going to have more data than they care to deal with, but it's also something that they have in their pocket for the next project or the next phase that they have. And so we really opened a lot of eyes, bringing a lot of those people in. Even same thing with subcontractors. I know Tim mentioned a lot of the subcontractors don't have a lot of that experience, but by bringing those subcontractors into those meetings and talking with them and kind of helping them, kind of coach them where they need to go with this stuff, a lot of them are adopting it a little more handily than they would, even probably 5 years ago. So our BIM services group, obviously with the coordination and compliance, we're also involved with training. We've got, I think there's close to 20 people now that we've sent through the certified BIM management process with AGC. That really helps kind of give credentials to those people that are involved in the BIM projects. Virtual reality, I've been using that myself on a couple of projects I'm involved with out in California. Especially with COVID, we had coordination meetings planned for our models to bring people in and kind of show them what the new, this was a water treatment plant that we were dealing with, how it was going to look. But what we ended up doing is after COVID is we created virtual reality models, and in this case we used Iris VR, and we would have virtual sessions with the guys that were going to be doing maintenance work in this facility, and we would show them, walk them through this thing and say, is this where you want this valve? Is this a good place to put this, control panel and stuff? And a lot of those guys, and again, they were, eyes open again. They were like, well, we never got that question asked until it was built. Usually they would go into a facility and say, I don't want that valve there, or this is a stupid place to put a control panel. So getting those guys involved in that whole process, we could take care of that stuff before we got out in the field and made all that a reality. We take care of all the 4D, 5D, 6D, you name it. We try to help. If the project doesn't already have something in place, we'll try and either find the right person or we'll do it ourselves. Put those models together so that we can help kind of track our costs, track our schedules. We even up to the 6D models will have all the item numbers, the costs that are available to those, what kind of filters the owner's going to need to replace once the place is built, things like that. Here recently, we've been getting into 3D printing. I think initially it was kind of a novelty. If you can imagine like a gas power plant, it looks pretty innocuous when you walk and drive by it on the highway, but there's a lot of detail in that. One client that wanted a 3D model of their plant, it literally took one guy, I think he had 2 machines running for 3 months straight, just printing all the pieces and all that. We had to figure out how to print pipes of all things at at a certain scale, and putting all that together. And it was like one of those old Revell models that you put together when you were a kid. It was pretty impressive. But a lot of that stuff, it seemed like a novelty when they asked for it, but they've actually since then asked for a second one because they have all their facilities management people involved now, where they can, if they're going to do work in a certain area, the safety guys can come out and plan their day around this model where they're going to, where they need to make sure that people are clear of an area because of chemical hazards, things like that. So we've seen a lot of benefit to having 3D models available to look for that. And a lot of what our BIM services do, and this goes to kind of my background with CAD support, is doing product research and development. So, like we talked about kind of being product agnostic, but we have, if you name a product like Visto or any of those ones that we use, it's one of our districts probably uses it. And it's one of those things that we've, it's one product isn't the answer to everything that your company does. There might be different tools for different districts, even different disciplines. A lot of our construction guys would have no use for Vista, but all of our design guys for MEP and things like that, that's a must-have. So it's things like that we try to do a little bit of R&D up front, so we know where those products fit, where they don't, and so we're not wasting money on things we're not going to use. This graphic I've been using for a while, and this is what I kind of use to sell the product to our clients and our owners. Why do we need BIM services? And if you look at the whole life cycle of building, no matter what you're building, if it's a house, power plant, anything like that, it all takes on this whole life cycle. If you're starting from a new greenfield, you're starting a brand new building, you're going through all documentation, fabrication, construction, that building is going to have a life of its own. And then by the time its life expectancy is done, you're back to demolition and you're starting another project. So this whole BIM services kind of incorporates every aspect of what this means and what construction is and how you're going to do your job, do it efficiently, make money, and make a building or make a product that's going to last. A lot of times, a lot of buildings you see that, I'm thinking about the one in San Francisco that's been tipping for years. You think about how the foundations were done on that building, and if they would have had, something like, some pre-planning like BIM services, maybe that wouldn't happen. They just kind of went through the whole, design and construction thing all at the same time. But now they're going back, they're actually using models of that building, of the foundations that they had to go back and scan and stuff, trying to figure out ways to fix it. But again, that's all part of BIM services. And one thing, especially and I think this works in any company, if you're trying to sell why your company needs BIM services, these are probably the highlighted ideas for it. Our number one thing for Kiewit is safety. We self-perform a lot of our own work. We actually have the largest private construction fleet in the nation. So when you talk about having 10,000 plus people working for you doing construction, you don't want anybody getting hurt. So safety coordination is a huge thing for us. We like to use the models for things like that too, to kind of help promote our safety environment. Having models that are data-centric, having all the information that's up front that's there helps minimize a lot of the delays in our schedules. A lot of the model quality, if you get everybody on the same page, your model quality improves eventually, which get feedback from different groups. The data consumption, I already alluded to that. We actually hire people that are just data savants that pull this information out of our models that is already there and figure out new ways to develop it or use that data. We've actually, and it's kind of an afterthought, but one of the big things that have happened with some of the projects we've been using is we've had fewer issues during construction. There's a lot of things that we coordinated in the office before we even put a shovel on the ground. A lot of that stuff is done beforehand, and it makes for a lot smoother projects, more money, obviously, better time spent doing other things instead of messing, rework and things like that. A lot of the deals we talk about for coordination meetings is just to help improve communication. Communication is probably the key when you're in the design phase, and if you're like us, we have construction guys out in the field that are, they might be waiting on us to give them information on a building or something that we're putting out, or if there is an issue, we can use a model coordinated for them. But that communication has to be nonstop. It has to be very well coordinated for anything to improve. And ultimately, you get happy clients with that. A lot of our clients that we serve are big utilities. I'm trying to think some other companies and things that we do that are outside of my power plant purview, but a lot of our clients, they're impressed with the data they get, they're impressed with the product they get from whatever we build, that they'll come back time and again. They'll use Kiewit as kind of a litmus test for a lot of other people that are bidding on their work and stuff based on what we've done in the past with our modeling. Now this whole process has not gone without any bumps in the road, and I guarantee yours won't either. Participation is the key. There are so many people, and I was probably one of them initially that, why do we need this information? Why do we need it? We're just going to go out and build it. We've got construction guys that have been out there for 30-some years. I don't need that. I know where my bulldozer is going to go. I know what I need. I need this type of crane, things like that. They already know that off the top of their head. Well, when those guys retire or, go away, then what are you left with? You're left with somebody, I thought he said a long time ago that this crane would fit here, but now it doesn't. Well, we actually use our models for that type of collaboration. We'll tell them, you have so much laydown area to park, 8, D9 dozers or something. We use those models to kind of help coordinate with construction on what they're going to do out in the field. Cross-district collaboration is kind of a big one. I know everybody talks about silos. Our group, our companies, probably guilty as that as anybody. We just have so many different variables through all different districts that they're all kind of doing their own thing. That's fine to a point, but you kind of want that collaboration to evolve, get more people involved and stuff like that. So, whatever Denver's doing, Kansas City, if Denver's doing something that's going gangbusters, it's really working, we want people in Kansas City to hear about it because we want that improvement to kind of, flow throughout the company and figure out things that, we've had problems with in the past. One of the other lessons we had was, I would say a big one here is limited internal capabilities. We have some people that will call themselves a BIM manager, and it turns out that they know Revit. They know how to spell Revit. That's about it. So we try to get those people plugged in. That obviously if they know that, they've got a decent foundation for modeling, things like that, but we want to help them improve as well. So we'll pull them to our BIM meetings, coordination, we'll get them the training they need, things like that, just to try and help, elevate some of the people that we've already got to have that resource in the future. So that's about it for us. We'll get some good questions out of this.
So much, appreciate it. Would encourage a sort of open forum Q&A and a conversation amongst the panels. If there's any burning, please go ahead and raise your hand. Brilliant.
Okay. This is for all of y'all. I would like to go and answer it. But do you have a process for helping plan and set expectations to set a project up for success?
Perfect. Yeah, we face a similar challenge through all of our projects that we start. So Dustin, you can share what you said. Oh, I'm sorry. To restate, she was just asking about processes that we follow to ensure that projects are successful. And you had a specific slide on that.
Sure. So, really it's just the planning and getting all the stakeholders involved at the planning stage and making sure everybody's voice is heard then, and then really just implementing it on a consistent basis along the way. That's the short answer to that. Communication and constantly circling back and making sure the plan's being followed.
Yeah, we found that without the management, the process is nothing, right? So you need the process and then the management on top. What are your thoughts, Tim?
Yeah, I'd say relationships. So coming into a new company, I realized the only way to get ahead, I have to make a relationship with pre-con. I have to get involved, what's your meetings like? Do you have a weekly meeting where you go over jobs? And also on the BD side, if we have pursuit coming out, I'm not aware of it, we should start this conversation very early on. And getting a relationship, especially with the internal side, is hard. I think that's the best impact.
And I think a lot of ours, for successful projects, I think we spend a lot of money on estimates. And that estimate actually creates our base model for what we're going to do in the future. So getting management buy-in, getting a good estimate, getting something up front that's on solid footing is probably the key for us. And usually if all that stuff's laid out, it's all very clear, management's on board, then usually the project is very successful.
Do you feel comfortable with addressing that, or would you like to dig in deeper?
I mean, there's always follow-up, but I think that's good.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for your courage and the question. We definitely consider ourselves a relationship-based company too, so thank you, Tim, for addressing that. So just to kick off a few more questions here. Oh, yes, sir.
He's good.
Come on up.
Yeah, just pass the mic. I got you.
Hello. I'm Jim Kenley, Zealous. We do reality capture, XCOM modeling, and AEC. My problem, though, has been the term BIM is so simplistic and so misunderstood. Would it help for buy-in to start redefining these terms? Because BIM is so much, it goes all the way. Building information, modeling, address, plan, redefining what we do in terms.
Sure, and just a point of clarification, and then I'll repeat the question. Was that buy-in from owners or buy-ins from GC, sir?
From everyone.
From everybody? Okay. All right, sounds
You know,
good.
you look at a contractor, and it's different, you look at an owner, a real estate agent, I got an address, that building.
Right, I love the question. Okay, so the gentleman's question was, the BIM process can be so simplified, but how do we make sure that we're getting every single stakeholder along the entire construction process to get them to buy into the process, not just oversimplify it, but how do we make sure that we can explain to that individual stakeholder why the BIM process is important? Was that a reasonable?
Yeah, I believe so. It's just that BIM's been around so long, early days, you know, somebody had that terminology, but it's grown. So.
Right. Yeah, how do we redefine BIM to the correct stakeholders, to the represented stakeholders? I imagine, Kurt, your company, you have to deal with many different districts, for example, so there's many different people you have to get buy-in from just within your.
Yeah, I think to address your question, right, when you asked about that, I think for us, the big thing is the BIM execution plan. It has to be very clear on who's responsible for what, when the deliverables are, what they're delivering, what LOD they're delivering. All that stuff has to be set up front. And I know the BIM execution plan can get very long, very complicated, but like you said, BIM is a very simple idea. So getting people plugged into that idea, letting them know that this is your responsibility, this is what I need from you, this is when I need it, that has to be made very clear from the beginning for everybody to have that buy-in.
Yeah, I was gonna say the BIM execution plan, when I looked at what we had, it was probably 10 years old. It's probably 30 pages. I threw it out right away. I just like, if the owner can't read the first page, why give him 30? So we did more of an exhibit type, BIM's probably, just the guidelines, is a 2-page article. Then their LOD is, obviously more intensive. But that's been the best. Well, actually, we had to rewrite some of our contracts too, even with our subs. That's interesting. The whole language of do you do BIM, what does that even mean? So we have to actually go back and rewrite our contracts.
I do like seeing, I see a lot of BIM implementation plans, and they're usually closer to like a single-page document that clearly states what each trade is responsible for. Then there's a few more pages of detail, but most people who are familiar with the process so far understand really quickly what's going to be expected, just whether or not there are as-built required, or all those different components. And then the contracting is a really big issue. On the way we interact with projects, typically, we're remodeling things that are already modeled, which I think is just, I hate doing things twice. So the civil engineers potentially modeling it, and then but the contract states that you cannot utilize that model for anything, so you're forced to recreate it from the two-dimensional plans. Just as an example, there's kind of a lot of
Wonderful, thank you for the detail there. Definitely a lot of focus on the BIM execution plan and the contract, and when we look at it, the stakeholders there are at least traditionally, the stakeholders are the folks that are executing on the BIM execution plan or potentially have an immediate dependency on the BIM execution plan, but maybe not the real estate agent doesn't have any insight into the BIM execution plan or the owner. So what are our thoughts on expanding the audience or trying to get a broader feedback loop engaged for the end of cycle, the facilities team, the real estate team, the owners of the world? Because of the BIM execution plans that I've been a part of, primarily it's a core focus team, and it may not include things in this conference about facilities management and how important it is to take that BIM model and go all the way to facilities management. Do you think that's something the general contractor is ultimately responsible for making sure that there's strong stakeholder alignment, or what are your thoughts on looking at everybody in the system?
I think a lot of it has to do with the data that's presented or how it's maybe formatted. Because like I said, I know my previous life before Kiewit, we worked with a lot of GCs and a lot of research. They had all the model data that they wanted, but they didn't really know what they had. So in order for us to relay that, we had to kind of either format the data, like for a realtor, they want to know square footage of lots or, how many apartments they could put onto this plot or something like that. We had to figure out where that data was at, even how to present it, best that they could consume it, even though it was there. But yeah, that was kind of
Okay. And like on the GC side, it's tough because when we get the design model, you have to redo the whole entire thing. So it's even, that's really why the FMLA dies on our side as a GC. We don't want to even bring it up. It's such a labor-intensive task. Go back and change the model. It really should have been done early on. The owner and the architect should have sat down and set that guideline fairly early on. And that's the only way it's going to move forward in this world. Those GCs just don't have the time to populate everything in that model. So,
The times I have seen it really work well is when the developer is also going to be the ultimate owner, right? If they know they're going to be operating that building, then there's a much higher chance of being able to utilize that data. But if they're going to offload it to someone else, they don't know it's going to be worth the effort to that potential buyer.
Wonderful. So what I gathered is it's incumbent upon all of us to gather the data and represent it in a way that's digestible. And then it's incumbent on us to ask for the right stakeholders in that room, ask for the owner, ask for the developer to be in that room with us. And I think that's something, that's a muscle that we're not quite used to flexing, is to say, hey, as the GC or as the contractor, as the subcontractor, we want the owner to be here in the room. That's almost the person that's always kept outside the room of the discussion. But I think the more that we encourage that the owner be present with us, especially in the planning process, I think the more successful that could be. All right, wonderful. Yes, ma'am. Good morning.
You guys talk about collaboration, communication, and reformatting data in ways that are digestible for your audience. So my question would be for the field, what has been the most effective format of that data where they've actually been able to make those thinking decisions or design decisions early on by sharing that visual information?
Thank you so much. And just to restate the question, how do we not only communicate the management or the owner or the GC, how do we communicate to the field? What's been our best success and how to share that information with the administrator?
So again, we're usually working with contractors that are sub-trade contractors that this is one of their first projects or they don't have BIM in-house. So some of the owners within the trade contractors, they have to get sold that they need to do it. It's not really, it's being dictated to them anyway. So usually that's their first, they're being told what to do. They don't like that, but it gives them incentive because they don't have a choice. But then what we like to do is go in and show them what parts of the model or the data that lives in the model that they can utilize to make their job better in the field. There are things that we can show them that once they see it actually through their first project, they want to do it again on their next project. Their job.
yeah, where we really are probably championing that side of it is like concrete, for example. They don't want to go through the drawings, go through architecture, and rebuild it out there. So we take a lot of liability and we will create edge slabs in the form of drawings, bring the coordination drawings as a separate package, so they know it's a one source deal. Because right now, drawings are always changing so much, it's impossible to keep up with it. So the BDC group really takes on that role of, hey, don't look at that drawing, look at this. I know it's, a lot of people say contractually it's dangerous, but ultimately we take the liability no matter what. The BIM folks always get blamed if it's wrong. So, in surveyors, yeah, always, oh, you laid this out completely wrong. What drawing you laid off of? Well, did you get the updated drawing this morning? No. Yeah. In the field. But that comes back to the contract too, is if you're doing a layout and survey, you gotta say, hey, off of W1, this date drawing, that's where I laid off of. So whether drawings come out that, we're not gonna do that. It's tough.
Yeah, our communication with the field kind of varies at what stage the project's in. A lot of our models, like our civil models, we'll use, I'll drop some product names, we use Trimble to do our motor control for all the grader, things like that, to kind of guide them how they're doing their work. Once we get into the actual construction and, hammers on nails, we have tablets or even phones that we utilize. My projects out in California utilize BIM 360. As we're posting models up, the guys out in the field can download on their phones or tablets, and they can do all the measurements they need or figure out what they're. We also load up work packages for that, so they'll tell us, hey, we've got a 5-man crew next week ready to do something. So we'll set up a work pack for at least the coordinators and the guys that are working on the schedules will develop a work pack that they're working in this area of the project, installing this pipe or this electric panel or whatever. So we use a lot of that stuff all coordinated with BIM 360.
Oh, awesome.
I think that was the first point. You've been waiting a while.
Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, thank you, sir. You're out of my field of view. So, yeah, go ahead and straighten it. No.
Question. So, in my experience working with large organizations, that tend to be collect really engaged with the amount of data sets. It's really powerful, and then never use them as well. So, my question for you guys is, what has worked in getting all stakeholders involved, like owners, contractors, stuff, whatever, to keep going back to that data and harnessing the value of it, to pass the cost of doing it?
Should I restate or did we out here? How do we take advantage of the data that we are harvesting through the BIM process and be able to communicate that without just leaving the data on the side and be forgotten about it like that?
Yeah, I think for us, it was probably goes back to even when we started introducing BIM models for construction, we were trying to explain that all the data you need is right here. Well, they don't have to read it, so we had to do a little bit of training to kind of get them up to speed on it. We have our own LiDAR and drone services team that they give us, I don't know how many terabytes of information on all these projects, but unless we communicate that with the field, they don't know how to use it. So a lot of it is training, communication. And again, I mentioned we hired a lot of data analytics people that aren't really tied to construction or engineering, that can format the data that they see into tables or formats or something else that somebody else can read. So it's kind of like having a fresh set of eyes on that data, more so than me just being a BIM guy or somebody else being a construction guy, having somebody else that has a different perspective than others.
Yeah, what's worked in the past is find a project and just say, this is going to be our end project. Like, we're going to champion this. Because a lot of it is like the ROI. You go back to the owners, they want to see metrics. I mean, 90% of the jobs we get is just a price check. But if we can really show them a really documented savings and costs and really focus on a job that's very similar to theirs, that's really very impactful.
I have two different perspectives, I guess. A lot of our work started out in the Silicon Valley, so those owners just want all the data they could possibly get. One of the things that made them successful was, one, just having that mentality, but also they did have a plan for what they were going to use it for. The facilities management software is, emerging, at least good, easy to use facility management software is an emerging market, but they have the faith that they'll be able to utilize it. They have plans for some of it already. And then it depends on the building life cycle too, I would say, because we have some other clients who are more like industrial. Those building life cycles are 50 to 100 years, and they don't want the data. They really don't. They just plan to do laser scanning when it comes time to do an upgrade to a part of the building, or tear it all down and rebuild it by that time.
Wonderful, thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for the question. We all may have heard the phrase "data is the new oil," right? So how do we harvest that oil? How do we turn it into something that's digestible? And focusing that back to revenue and cost is going to get immediate attention of the stakeholders, of the decision makers. Beautiful question. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, the question was about our estimating efforts. There's different methods for doing estimating, but at least for our experience, what we found the most beneficial is actually to start a brand new model and actually do a full-blown model. I mean, everything we can possibly, we'll have some cookie cutter things, like for our power plants, we'll have our standard generators and, you know, all the other components that make up a power plant, but we customize those for the site that we're designing for, the megawatts or whatever the customer's asking for. We'll do what they call a grounds up estimate that we go through everything. We end up usually getting construction involved in that to kind of get their 2 cents in on, you know, if this configuration will work, if they have, you know, resources in that region of the country to gear up for it, what's it going to cost, and mobilize, things like that. But yeah, we do it from the ground up. It's not what?
It's not in the BIM model.
It's the model that we end up with will be a BIM model. Some projects we will actually take our estimate model, and that will be our foundation for a project that we start from scratch. And like I said, having even though they are a cookie cutter, we might have a generator like a GE generator for a power plant. It's a standard model, but it's got all the logistics and the costs and everything that it costs to implement that and build it, ship it, fire it up, all that stuff. So all that information's in that group that we have from the estimate. So that's kind of built into the foundation.
We have noticed a trend with our clients this year, particularly that they're starting to build maybe an LOD kind of 100, 200 version of the model during the estimate cycle to help them even have a little bit more accuracy, and then they want to hand that off to the BIM team, to the LOD 400 team. But you know, potentially ideal would be having that model way before you estimate the full project. So I'm curious, what do we think? Where do we see the industry going and accelerating, or bringing forward much further into the schedule, the entire BIM pre-construction process?
And I think that's kind of what you alluded to when I came on board with Kiewit. I mean, things are still in flux right now, but we did the same thing. We did like a level 1 or 200 model, and then when the estimate was over, that model was gone. And we got thinking, okay, you guys put a lot of hours, a lot of estimates, a lot of work into this model. Why are we just trashing it? So we have figured out ways to improve our estimating group and to improve the BIM effort in the estimating group to where we can take the models and at least have a foundation and move them forward. And we're not wasting all that time and all that effort.
Thank you for the question. All right. Yeah, we'll go up front, we'll work backwards. Yes, sir.
So I'm the transportation thing over. We came through today and through an as-built phase right now. And for those who don't know, they understand we're one of the first major authorities to do BIM on a large scale, horizontal as well as vertical. And my question is, when you guys have dealt with GCs and primes who don't have BIM in-house already sort of baked into the process, what are you seeing with effective ways to kind of get them up to speed so it's not a major problem as the project progresses?
Beautiful question, thank you. So point of fact that you shared was that Denver was one of the first airport authorities to utilize BIM on both horizontal and vertical perspective, which is incredible. I didn't know that, so thank you for sharing that. Beautiful airport. The question was actually, since I was restating that, GCs and primes that don't have BIM in-house, how do you get them up to speed and all on the same page, right? That was the question. Perfect.
Well, most of the time I'm like one letter step down and getting trade contractors up to speed. We're doing some work with data centers right now, and there's a reference model. So it's just for getting up to speed with the program. The GC's already up to speed with their BIM process, but as far as the program, there's a fully, data centers are somewhat of a repeat type of project. There's not a lot that's unique. So that's one thing I imagine it could be used for other scopes.
I work with detailers. They're like, hey, if detailer is doing plumbing in Revit, I'm like, well, who created your template? And they say, I just got handed it off for this. I'm like, well, I have a template. And we would really work together. And some of the details in our local market definitely share templates between each groups, and then they give to other subs. So that helps speed that process along. Because before it was a lot of third party, you would think, hey, talk to this reseller, they have someone to help you. By the time they train them and implement some type of template, it's just going to take forever. So I definitely do champion, get involved in your local market. Like, you know, Atlanta's got a really great group where it's a BIM leadership group. You know, each office, you know, should have, or each town, city, should have a local group like that and really go beyond just your local VDC group and folks, get down to the detail level.
And in my previous life, I had that exact same experience. I worked with a smaller BIM coordination firm, and GCs would hire us because they were part of the contract said they had to do BIM, so they would hire us because we did BIM. But a lot of the communication was, you know, GC just told us go out, do BIM, do what you do, and you know, give us your product. But what we tried to do as a smaller firm is we tried to educate them on what they were getting. So hey, we did go out and scan this, and actually one of my friends is still involved in that. He actually did some scanning in the basement of BIA. And so what he would do is go out and do the scans, do all his replication, do all those things that he needed to do. But then when he handed over the model, he would explain what he was giving them, you know, where the dimensions were, how it fit into their overall plan for the remodel, things like that. So the big thing of that was communication.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Understanding that the mapping and survey work is the initial step, is there any kind of document that I can go find for them to define what those standards and accuracies and requirements are for your project?
So just to make sure I rephrase and understand correctly, so you're coming from the mapping and imaging side or mapping and surveying side, and you'd like to understand how can you better fit into the BIM processes and what standards are
I
there?
would just like to know where the document is, so
Yeah.
I can go review that and understand what the requirements, specifications, and accuracies are for that initial step.
Right, what documents are out there to help you feed into that process? I'm aware of some standards bodies that are out there that are forming. Salah Eckhart is on one, for example, and she's providing a keynote this afternoon. So that's a great question that we can bring to Salah as well. But gentlemen, are you aware of sort of public-facing information that would help the mapping and surveying crews tie in better with the BIM team?
Well, as far as project specific, I would say the BIM execution plan may have some control information and allude to what there's usually a section that'll tell you the aspirations for using BIM on the project. So that'll give you an idea of what type of reality capture would be best utilized. But then as far as there's the ASPRS, which is a geospatial it's the governing body for geospatial work, accuracy and density points, things like that for LiDAR. And US IBD has their LOA, which is level of accuracy. So there's different levels, just like there's different levels of BIM, there's different levels of accuracy and development.
Yeah, we've been using what's called a layout execution plan. That's more specific to the survey side. And that really sets our guidelines of, okay, what type of civil file we're getting, how we get that. It helps a little bit, but there's really not been something we referenced that has to be X, Y, and Z, honestly.
But you should ask for it.
Yeah, you should, yeah.
I like that. I haven't heard of the layout execution plan yet, so maybe there's a template that's out there, or at least in our community we can surface it.
Yeah, especially because of how we digest that file, because if we're doing our own self-layout, we need to identify what type of coordinates to use. You know, what's the benchmarking, and obviously, you know, is it going to be in a 3D civil file versus a 2D file? It's a big difference, obviously.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. So,
For the construction procurement process, are you noticing any decline or reduction of contingency fees or risk fees that are being calculated
So are we, in construction procurement, are we able to measure risk or de-risk based on the model? Is that the?
and how does that affect price?
And how does the model help de-risk or help affect the price? Beautiful.
So recently I won, this is the erector formwork, and they like, we have layout dollars, but they don't have a layout crew. So it's we took on that risk, so we had to do it. But I did propose the outsourcing of it, but the amount of money in our market, I couldn't say no to that amount of money. It's $200,000-$300,000 to do that. So now I'm actually seeing a lot of the other concrete groups. Their detailers are very young, novice, using the models. So we're trying to actually elevate them. And actually, I proposed recently too that we'll do your shop drawings because we're faster and better to use tools where they don't really have an Autodesk type package. They're so small. So I'm starting to see them a little bit, put that money into the beginning for detailing and layout, and we're actually buying it out for internally.
In our experience, we've actually had some of our procurement, some of the items that we're working into our model dictate how we're developing that model. We have like our projects out in California that I was talking about. One project had 50-some certain specific tanks. They were specialized tanks that had to be designed. The whole design process was going to last less than a year before they started construction. So we had to base when those tanks could be built and delivered back into our models, so we knew which area to plan to do our stub-ups and foundations first. Otherwise, we would have been way behind the curve, and the tanks might not even have been done by the time we started construction. So a lot of that procurement you're talking about, we knew what the cost was up front, but that kind of drove our schedule and our modeling efforts based on what we bought.
That sounds like a great application of the BIM 4D process. So
Yeah.
that we plan and schedule into that. It's beautiful. Yeah, I'd love to see that in action. Wonderful. Let's go with this gentleman and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Cameron. We heard great information about the BIM services during and pre and during construction. And then, going through the vendors and consider all exciting technology, wearable scanning devices and LiDAR and imagery and all that stuff. And I'm thinking, looking where the technology is going, and what are your thoughts on BIM services for like existing structures? Where do you see that going and what are the challenges?
Beautiful. So how do we not only address new construction and managing BIM and with the new technology that's coming out with wearables, but how do we also address tenant improvement construction with new technology with wearables?
Well, being on the land surveying side, that's really, we like to supplement the traditional land surveying, which is kind of more of a two-dimensional plan and just line work that is intended to be printed out in 2D, and supplementing that with, getting existing conditions that are typically via LiDAR now. Those can be converted easily into 3D BIM geometry. There's a lot of, for like building fit outs, there's a lot of existing laser scanning to BIM, scan to BIM, it's referred to. That's been pretty well documented ever since laser scanners had good ROI. And there's just more and more sensors and vehicles that can get into places that they wouldn't have been able to before. So tight spaces where you don't want to put people in tunnels or underground for caves and mining and things like that. There's a lot of opportunity in existing. And then there's a lot of sensors for picking up underground utilities that didn't exist before, with GPR and things like that. And that can go straight to a 3D model where it couldn't before. Automating some of that, I think, is where we're at now.
Yeah, I think I'm also trying to figure out how we pay for stuff, and it's been interesting because on the architecture side, the owner side, the architecture groups don't really have the understanding. They might know somewhat of it. So if we start early on, I'm able to say, hey, we can do an as-built, we'll scan it, we'll actually model the existing structure, which they prefer anyways. But the amount of money that we normally get from that task is a lot more than we would on the coordination and actually the BIM effort. And that's a great revenue stream to keep us paying for R&D and other technology as well.
Yeah, and in my experience, and again, this is prior to Kiewit, one project I'm thinking that would line right up with your question was we did a north of Yale University, they had some buildings that were built back in the 1800s, and all their plans were on parchment paper, basically. They didn't have any kind of modeling or any effort. They knew they needed some upgrades and some structural efficiencies, but they didn't know where they were. So we had crews that actually went in and scanned that thing by hand, inside and out, and we modeled everything, and basically showed them where they had the space to put new HVAC or where they needed to, base up their structural efficiencies. But now those 1800 model buildings have an actual model for them. They're all, I don't want to say up to date, but there's something useful there, and that was just by going in and scanning everything. That was something they didn't have before.
It's an amazing project. Thank you for sharing that. Could I get a show of hands of questions, and then I'll do a time check? So we have two, I think three. Okay. Cool. So we'll take these 3 questions, and then a quick time check, and then we'll break out into the quadrants if you want to sort of follow up individually with anyone. Does that sound good? So we'll go front to back. Yes, ma'am.
So question first. What are some of the things that you have learned with the new data, and have you course corrected given that information?
Have we learned with the data that we're collecting? Have we been able to learn and course correct from that data?
Yeah, I think there's probably too many examples to iterate.
Yeah, the whole presentation itself.
It's been interesting, and especially with Kiewit, we're such a big organization. We've got a lot of different, feet in the water doing different things. But a lot of the data that we've found that were already in our models that maybe our construction counterparts weren't aware of. I want to think one of the probably the little things, it doesn't seem little, but was just the coordination itself. I mean, we've had, and I alluded to, the construction guys that have been there for 30 years, they knew exactly where they would place their equipment and all that stuff before they got out on site. But once we got the model developed and we had more detail on certain sites, we would help them, make better decisions on things like that of logistics. And with our construction fleet, we have them spread out all over the nation. So whether they needed a certain type of crane that maybe we only had 2 of, they needed it on this side of the country or that side, maybe we use the model to determine, okay, well, maybe we have another one in our inventory that would work better here. Before, they might have shipped that thing all the way across the country and decided that, oh, dang, it's too big for that project. So using that data, we've made better decisions up front than we would have otherwise.
And I think, I said back to front, but of course I didn't start at the front, so very front to back. And then we'll do a popcorn, so maybe just one if you guys want to raise your hand, if you want to take the question, we'll do one answer. Yes, sir. Perfect.
In regards to standing for architect or owner, you now own that liability. How do you pass that on to them for document purposes?
So how's the liability of scanning passed on to the architect when you do the scanning?
So like this existing job, we're doing a lot of penetrations and floors, so it's the same thing. I created a structural as-built for we're going to penetrate. That's really where the liability was, sort of. Contractually, no one ever agreed to anything, obviously. But when I looked at the structural drawings, it was drawn. Moral story is all the columns are all over the place. And then we still have to do GPR as well. So even though the structural engineer was trying to tell us roughly where not to drill, we still have to do GPR. This is because it's dumb not to, drill it. Yeah, liability, like I said, it always goes back to I get blamed for everything anyways. So, moral story is just keep part of the replacing anyways. So I sort of use that as my token. Yeah, exactly. I mean, but the superintendents, they know that. They definitely know you make one mistake versus 1,000. But of course, they get always known for that one mistake. It's not good. But it's difficult. Yeah, and I think where we're going though, I think, especially in Atlanta, our architectural groups, they just don't really have that technology. We're going to be either doing it as a third party, or in a separate contract, and that's usually what we do.